Let's start talking about the well-being of EMTs and how to have a long, healthy career here. Why do we want to have good well-being? We need to be able to take care of our patients. I mean, that's why we're all getting into the job, so that's what we want to do. If we're not healthy at the time of the call of our patients, then we might not be able to help them out the way we want to. Plus, we want to have a long career and be able to live out life healthy. Things we can do to help keep that well-being going. Have good, solid relationships. Know your friends. Know who you can talk to. Some friends are better than others for talking to when you have issues with the work. In the past I've talked to some people that had no clue what EMS was, and they get kind of scared when you start talking to them. So find somebody that'll listen to you and understands what you're going through. Maintain a good amount of exercise. Get adequate sleep. We worked 24 hours a day, and sometimes we get stuck on night shift or working a 24-hour shift where we're up all night. So it's kind of rough to get the right amount of sleep, but do everything you can to get a nice quiet place to sleep. Try to not work too hard and stay awake on your off hours. Get all your sleep you can. Eat healthy. Sometimes that's a little bit more difficult when you're on shift and you're stationed posted at 7-Eleven, and that's the only option you have is the bean burrito at 7-Eleven. But do the best you can. Maybe pack a lunch or something. Limit alcohol and caffeine intake. Do not live on the Starbucks or Dutch Brothers, and maintain a healthy lifestyle by seeing your doctor on a regular basis. Get your vaccines. Make sure you're up to date on everything. One of the things that's really hard for EMS providers is maintaining that relationship with a doctor, because you're in the healthcare all the time and you don't want to go see a doctor on your time off. Uh, so let's talk about our personal protection. What we do to protect. We use what's called standard precautions because we can't really tell by looking at a patient what kind of diseases they may have. The common one right now that everyone's talking about is COVID. You can't tell by looking at a person if they are COVID positive, they've got a cold, or the smoke in the air is causing some type of discomfort or a cough or something like that. So we're going to use as much precautions as we can up front. That's why we call them standard precautions, or you can also hear them called personal protective equipment or body substance isolation. One of the things we talk about a lot is if it's icky and sticky and not yours, don't touch it. So we're going to try to find ways to protect us from these different diseases. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, sets our guidelines for how we need to address bloodborne pathogens and protective gear for every employer. They set the rules on what we need to wear, what kind of programs we need to have in place for employees for prevention of exposure and also post-exposure. Every employer will have a written program. You should be familiar with that when you go to work at these different locations. Some of the things you might see is standard personal protective equipment, eye protection, safety glasses, very important, keep everything out of your eyes. You have different types of masks, and we'll talk about those, and then the different types of gloves. Keep the bad stuff off your hands. Protective gloves, mostly vinyl, non-latex. Used to be a lot of gloves were made out of latex. Starting to get a lot of people with latex sensitivity. Had several students come through class in the past who had latex sensitivity, so we're very cautious about what we use even in class. But you need to be aware of that. If you're using gloves on a patient and they start having a reaction, maybe it's something to do with your gloves. If you've got a situation where there's a high chance of tearing your gloves, you might want to think about maybe some leather gloves to cover your latex, non-latex gloves, or something like that. When you take off gloves, it's a very specific process, and we'll go over that in class. Putting the gloves on, fairly easy. Taking them off, we got to remember that if there's something on the outside that you don't want to touch you, you don't want to get that on your skin as you're taking them off. So we'll show you a process of pulling one glove inside out and then using clean hand to go underneath the other glove and pull it inside out. And then the key to stopping us spreading disease, even if we're wearing PPE, is to have good hand washing. One good thing that's come out of the COVID pandemic here is that people are learning how to wash their hands. warm soapy water, 20 seconds, sing happy birthday, dry on a paper towel, and use the paper towel to open the door to leave. The alternative is an option for us, the alcohol-based hand cleaners. They do work, but they are not a substitution for hot soapy water. They work on the ambulance where we don't have sinks, but as soon as you get to a location that has a sink with running water, you really should grab the hot soapy water, wash your hands for 20 seconds and clean them up even if you had disinfected them before with a little alcohol. Another important piece of personal protective equipment is your eye and face protection. What we want to do is have some type of glasses on that has side shields. Even better, they make them with little foam around the sides of the glasses, around the tops and bottoms, so even body fluids don't splash in there. Great protection. If you're doing something such as OB deliveries, there's lots of body fluids, so those are times you might want to even get a face shield. Mask. With COVID, we've all been exposed to the idea of wearing masks, so that should not be an issue. Anytime we've got a patient with any type of airborne contaminant, whether it's tuberculosis, COVID, SARS, bird flu, any of the diseases out there, even the common flu, we should be wearing an N95 mask or a HEPA mask, a high efficiency particulate air mask. These are all approved by NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. That's an organization that looks at how we manage our personal protective gear and make sure it's up to speed. And then the other thing we have the option, as I mentioned, is the face shields. Give you full protection over your face and mouth. You see a lot of those around. People are using those to kind of protect against COVID too. Another piece of protective equipment that we use quite frequently, if we have time, is the gown. It's typically a jacket that you put on or something that covers down to your wrist and buttons up the front, or they make them that tie in the back. If you have somebody that's severe bleeding, there's blood squirting everywhere, other body fluids, childbirth, or somebody that has some type of known contagious disease, such as COVID, we put the gowns on and we provide that extra protection for ourselves. Two diseases that we're concerned about in the blood are hepatitis B and C. Just knowing your basic medical terminology, HEPA is liver and titus is inflammation, so they're inflammation of the liver. The bad thing about hepatitis B and C is the virus will actually stay active in blood for several days after the fact. So you could have somebody bleed in the back of the ambulance. 2 or 3 days later, you get tired, lay down in the back of the ambulance to take a nap, and get your mouth on where there might have been blood. So very important that we want to clean up after ourselves and then protect ourselves by not doing things that expose us to these diseases. Hep B is deadly. It attacks the liver. Now we have hepatitis B vaccines. That hasn't been around for a long time. Something I'd recommend that if you have had the hepatitis B vaccine, get a titer done ever so often to make sure it's still active. I had it originally in 1990 and a second dose in 2000 and a third dose in 2010 because it never has stayed active on me. So take all the precautions you can to make sure that's actually working. Hep C, we don't have a vaccine for, so that's another one that you have to be afraid of. But as long as you're using the right PPE and protecting yourself, you're doing the best you can to prevent these disease transmissions. TB, it's a disease of the lungs that you see going around areas with low health care and high populations, homeless camps, drug encampments, and jails are places you see it a lot. Colorado Springs was actually one of the treatment sites for TB in the early 1900s because the high altitude and dry air were good for the patients and helped them fight the disease a little bit better. We don't have a high incident of TB anymore, but it does pop up in the homeless camps around town on a fairly frequent basis. If you see somebody that's having difficulty breathing, they're coughing a lot, put a mask on them, put a mask on yourself, and protect everybody in the area. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, that's another disease out there. Actually, when I started working in EMS, HIV and AIDS was not an issue. So I am before AIDS, as that's how old I am. Back in the 90s, we finally learned about this disease that was coming in certain populations that increase your immune compromised problems, and we started wearing gloves. So I am actually old enough that we didn't wear gloves when I started EMS. It's a low risk to healthcare workers because it's harder to transmit. You have to have a really good body fluid to body fluid contact for this one to transmit. Unlike hepatitis B or tuberculosis, you can't just get it from being around the area. You have to have the fluid contact. Body fluid or blood is your usual route. I've had several patients that had HIV, and they would warn me before I started an IV to be extra careful, and as long as you're taking all the precautions, you're very low chance of catching it. Other diseases. This one popped up a few years ago, Ebola. Uh, it was 2014, hemorrhagic fever. It goes in and actually causes your blood to lose the clotting factors. When they were having the Ebola outbreak in Africa, Fort Carson sent a large number of soldiers over to help with the treatment and building hospitals. When they returned, we were concerned here in Colorado Springs that they might bring Ebola with them, so they were quarantined for several weeks after the fact. Because of my work at Colorado Springs Utilities, we were not sure if the disease was still active when it was released from the body. And so I mapped out every manhole and every pipe that went from the quarantine location to our treatment plants so that we could prevent our workers from going in those if they might have some active Ebola and get exposed to those. So I mapped out poo flow throughout the city, which was fun. SARS and MERS, respiratory syndromes, these are the same type of disease virus as the COVID virus. So we're pretty familiar with that one. If you're not familiar with that, with the COVID disease, I'll catch you up in person because it's been on every TV channel, every media, every social media outlet. So we should be pretty familiar with the respiratory diseases now. Some other diseases we're concerned about, avian flu. This one's mainly poultry to poultry. Sometimes it gets infections into humans if they're working around the poultry, but human to human is very rare. The one thing that disappeared over the last couple years that hopefully doesn't come back is the flu. The flu back in the 1918 time period actually killed 30 to 50 million people around the world because everybody was going back and forth across the oceans fighting World War I and transmitting this flu around the world. So it became a bad issue. Simple thing to protect against the flu, put a mask on, wash your hands. Same as we're doing for COVID. So infection control, we talked about OSHA being the guidelines. It says you have to have infection control plans. They also have some requirements for employees to actually use the equipment. If you don't use the personal protective equipment that your employer does provide for you, then you may be partially liable for any exposure. So it's really important that you use the equipment you're given. If you have some type of exposure, you have to let your employer know right away. That's part of the infection control plan. As students, if you have an exposure on your clinical time, you need to let me know immediately, and then we have an exposure control plan worked through UC Health. We'll send you in, get you tested, get you the prophylactic treatment right away. Hopefully that doesn't happen because you're going to be wearing your PPE and you're going to avoid any icky, sticky things that aren't yours. Key components of your exposure plan. You have to have the plan, you have to have education, everybody has to have the right training. You have to train the employees how to put on the gloves, how to put on the mask, how to take off the equipment when it's done. Everybody has to be provided a hepatitis B vaccine. If you're unwilling or unable to take the vaccine, you sign a paperwork that says you're not going to hold the company liable if you catch it. Methods of control. We have gone to a lot of needleless IV systems so that we don't have a lot of needles floating around the back of the ambulance. We still use needles to start IVs, but once the IV is in, there's very little sharp objects. Housekeeping. How do you clean up? What do you clean up with? Bleach and water, 1 to 10 solution. Kills pretty much anything out there, including the COVID virus. Proper labeling of equipment. If anything's dirty, it goes in a red bag that has a biohazard symbol on it. That's how we know that things are, we don't want to take care, we don't want to use those again. Post-exposure evaluation, that's what I talked about. If you get exposed, you let us know, we get you in for testing, then we get you the follow-up care, probably some prophylactic medication. The Ryan White Care Act. Several years ago, there was a dentist that exposed his patients to, I believe it was HIV. Based on that incident, they pushed through a law that says EMS providers can find out if the other person had any type of communicable disease. So if you get exposed by a patient, you do not have to have the patient's permission to obtain that information. It's a law that you can get that even if you don't get permission through HIPAA. So something's really good about our protection. If you have an airborne exposure, that's one route. If the bloodborne, then they do the blood draws. Key thing here is to notify the employer that you've had exposure, document it, and then they will take care of the follow-up information for you. TB compliance. OSHA has respiratory standards. You have to have a N95 or a HEPA mask. You have to have one that fits correctly. They come in different sizes. If you are having if you have to transport a patient that has some type of respiratory disease, whether it's TB, COVID, Ebola, put a mask on that patient, a HEPA mask, put a HEPA mask on yourself or N95 mask, and then limit your other procedures. If you're going to do something with their airway, think twice. Do they really need it? Do not withhold care for your patient, but try to find ways to take care of their airway without stirring up any of the diseases. They've made some really creative shields to put around your patients while you do endotracheal suctioning and intubation thanks to COVID. So we've got some extra protections out there. Use what's available in your system. You need to be up to date on your immunization. It is like PPE. If you have immunization, it's like showing a wanted poster to your white blood cells. Your white blood cells says, hey, if I see this guy, we go attack it, and this is how we're going to attack it. They form a plan. So you give the immunization, you develop those white blood cells recognition, and then you have increased immunity and increased protections against the disease. Doesn't say you won't get the disease, but it will be able to fight it because it's already seen it once. The other thing we want to do is make sure you have regular TB testing. It doesn't protect you from it, but you can get treatment much quicker if you're aware that you've had it. Other immunizations, you guys are going to catch the flu vaccine requirement for your clinicals. I believe October 1st, we have to have flu vaccines for everybody going in the OR or ER. And then the other one you're probably going to have is your COVID vaccine. I don't know if they haven't said if they're requiring it for students yet, but it is required for employees, so it's coming, I'm sure. There is stress in EMS. There's stress from working odd hours, strange hours, long hours. There's stress from working with the same person for 12 hours in the same ambulance. There's stress from the things you run into. So you're going to have to develop your own ways to manage the stress. We'll give you some ideas on things you can do to help manage that stress. You have to be aware of the signs of stress on your partner or your friends and family that you're around. If you see somebody that needs help, get them help. There's a great organization here locally called Signal Code 4. They are a nonprofit that specializes in public safety, mental health. Great organization. The founder was a paramedic up in Cripple Creek and Woodland Park area. They offer great service, and they adjust their rates based on what you can pay based as an EMT. So they've got some good opportunities to help. What you need to understand is how to maintain your sanity as you go through this part. Understand the physical problems you're going to develop with stress. Sometimes stress is good. Stress causes our heart rate to increase and our muscles to go faster and our eyes to get bigger and be able to see better. But it's when that stress gets beyond what we can control that it becomes an issue. The first stage is that fight or flight. That's when your parasympathetic, or your sympathetic nervous system takes over and your heartbeat goes up, your digestion decreases, your blood flow increases, your eyes dilate so you can see better. The second stage is where we start to cope. We get to the point where we can handle the stress that's going on and we relax and we can take care of what needs to be done. The problem that we get to the very end is when we get to the exhaustion. You've used every resource in your body to take care of everything you had to do. About 10 years ago, I responded to a tornado in my hometown in Joplin, Missouri. The drive there, I was all under fight or flight because it was my hometown. I knew everybody. I knew lots of people that were injured and missing. So I was kind of amped up on the 12-hour drive there. Got there, I took care of what I needed to do. I worked in the emergency operations center for a few weeks, helping make sure things happened and got taken care of. When I drove back home, I fell asleep 2 hours outside of the city, slept for another 4 hours on the side of the road until the police officer stopped to make sure I was okay. I was so exhausted because I'd been running in that second stage of managing my stress. My body was totally run down. So he was nice enough to make sure I got to a hotel and slept for a while longer before I drove the rest of the way home. Just remember these three stages: the fight or flight, the first stage, the second stage is resistance, and the third stage is your exhaustion. Anytime we have a critical incident, we're going to have strong emotional responses. We need to be aware of what those responses are so we can work within our systems to make sure we're taken care of. Acute stress reactions, you see the catastrophic event like a huge fire, a building collapse, just a simple car crash where you actually know the victims can be an acute stress reaction inducing event. Know what your signs and symptoms are. You're confused, you're stressed, you're uh, can't focus, you have emotional outbursts. Things just aren't normal. They might need some professional help. Seek the right help. Make sure you find somebody that can talk to you and listen to you. One good thing the Colorado Springs Fire Department did several years back is start a peer support program. So if you have an acute stress reaction, you talk to another firefighter who's been trained to listen and to look for triggers that might need more help than they can provide, but it's somebody that knows your job, that's a peer that can actually understand what you're talking about. I've talked to just some counselors before, and when they ask me what's the worst thing I've ever seen, I tell them and they end up crying in the corner and I have to consult them. Um, so make sure you have the right person. Another type of stress reaction is delayed, typically called the post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. These are symptoms that show up months, years after the incident. They're usually triggered by something similar or something that gets the mind on that topic. Hard to recognize, hard to deal with, but you need to get these people to professional help. If you're having issues yourself, you need to get professional help. It's not wrong. I told you about Signal Code 4. They're public safety providers that actually treat you. So you've got people that understand why you're going through what you're going through. Cumulative stress reaction, you have just been doing everything so long, it's called burnout. You've seen 50,000 of the same type of call and you're done with it. It's years of low-level stress that just get to the point of you can't deal with it anymore. Anxiety, boredom, apathy, loss of interest in anything pleasurable in life. It's hard to get past the cumulative stress. Also starts having some physical complaints. You lose your ability to sleep. You start having a loss of emotional control, irritability, depression. You're just having a bad day, and it's always going on. If it gets to the point whether you're withdrawn or having suicidal thoughts, we need to get these people, or if it's you, get yourself to some form of care. There's been several suicides in the last several years of EMS providers, even here locally, that we don't want this to happen. So if you know of anybody that's having thoughts, or if you are, reach out. Find somebody that you can talk to and get those things taken care of as quick as possible. Causes of stress. Multi-casualty events. You see more patients than you can handle. It's just one of those things that we're going to run across eventually in your career, and it's going to be stressful because as a EMS provider, you're going to try to figure out who you can help and who you can't help, and you're going to make some tough decisions. Any call that involves infant or children always gets the people going as far as stress. Severe injuries, gross deformed injuries, abuse and neglect. Please resist the urge to abuse and neglect the person that caused it to your patient. It will only get you time off. It does feel good, but you don't want that on your record that you hit a child abuser. It does feel good though. Death of a coworker, whether it's work related or not, somebody you work with died, and that causes you stress. So these are all things that you can think of as triggers. Start looking for help if you need it. Signs and symptoms of stress. Eustress. Eustress is the actual good stress that we run into. You get a call for a 2-year-old child in a pool. They're pulling them out. They're starting CPR. Your pulse rate goes up. You drive a little faster. That's because you got the eustress that's helping you get to that point where you can help take care of the child and save them. Distress is the bad stress. That's the negative stuff, the long-term health care or health problems. It wears your body down. You don't sleep good. You don't eat well, and things don't go good in your life. Problems you're going to run into at the distress is irritability. You can't concentrate. You can't make a decision. Changes in daily activity. You normally go for a walk, but you quit going for a walk. You quit eating at normal times. You have anxiety. Things set you off too easy, so you're worried about that. You're indecisive. What do you want for dinner? I don't know. Well, I don't want this, but I want this. Think about those things. If you're having some of these symptoms, reach out for the help. Guilt. Why was it me? Why wasn't it me? Why was it him? Why did this happen? Or I could have done something to save them. Isolation. You go hide in your basement and lock the door when you get home. You lose interest in everything, whether it's work, relationships, your favorite TV show. You just don't watch it anymore. Those are signs you might have a little bit extra stress in your life, and you need to think, do I need some ideas for dealing with stress? Let's look at changing our lifestyle, be more healthy, go for a walk on a regular basis. I've got a friend that every morning she gets up at 6 a.m. and goes for a walk before she goes to work. It's just a time to reflect on what's going on, get a little exercise, get the body pumping. Think about your dietary habits. I know it's not the best option when you're sitting at a posting at 7-Eleven, but think of the best way you can eat. Devote some time to relaxing. Find your favorite thing to do. Go to your happy place and relax. Maybe change your shift or ask for a different location to be posted at. Maybe different call types, more family time. I worked for an ambulance service one time that our city cars ran 24 to 28 calls a day in a 24-hour shift. So you would be up all night running calls back to back. We had another station that was more rural, and we could go 2 or 3 days between calls. So every third month, we rotated one shift out to this rural station. So 2 months you were at the busy station, 1 month you were at this slow station. Made it a little bit easier on life because you got to relax a little bit between calls and get some downtime. So maybe it's your partner. Maybe you need to change shifts, maybe change partners. I've worked with some people that you just can't stand, and you want to kill them by the end of the shift. So that adds to your stress. Some invisible wounds. You see the tragic scene. You don't think it bothers you, but eventually it catches up. So think about these things. A friend of mine had a call where he had a small child that got killed in a rear end collision because he wasn't buckled in properly. He did everything he could to try to save him. He was a paramedic on scene, and it just totally tore him up. He didn't think about it until 2 or 3 months later when he had some more child calls, and this one he just kept going back, and he ended up quitting being a paramedic, went to truck driving school, and now he drives a truck for FedEx. But it's one of those things you got to be aware of. Is these might they might not be something you can see right away, but you need to be watching yourself and making sure you're taking care. Another way that some EMS systems try to deal with stress is provide critical incident stress management. What they will do is get a group of employees together that may have been exposed to the same incident and have a debriefing, a critical incident stress debriefing. So we put 10 tough public safety people around in a circle and ask them to share their feelings. It always turns out the same, where one or two people will talk, the other people will hide, and it doesn't. Nobody gets their feelings out. So that's why, like I said before, the Springs Fire went to the peer support, where you actually have one-on-one conversations with a coworker and not have to worry about sharing your feelings in front of a large group. So here's your critical incident stress debriefings, where we kind of diffuse the incident. Some things you might want to know for testing purposes is it happens between 24 and 72 hours after the incident. So we get everybody together so we can talk about it as quick as we can and get the feelings out in the open so that we can deal with them. Some of the reactions, and this is something you definitely need to memorize. It's going to be on tests throughout your career. The 5 stages of emotional of dealing with stress: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Denial, it's not me, it can't be me, I don't have the disease. Anger, why did it get to me? Why have I got cancer? Bargaining, well, if if I just get to go to Vegas one more time, I'll be happy. Depression, I didn't get to go to Vegas. I'm not going to see my family anymore. And then acceptance, I'm going to die. I'm going to go skydiving. I'm going to go ride a bull. So those are the 5 stages you need to remember: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Understanding how your patients are dealing with these things is very important. If you get to the stage where the patient's in the acceptance stage, but the family's in the bargaining stage, it might not work out well when you're trying to deal with your patient and help them through the process that they wanted to do at home, but now the family's decided they want to take them to the hospital. So be patient with the bystanders, be patient with the family, listen to them. One thing you don't want to do is give false reassurance. If they are terminal and they are at the end stages, do not say, yeah, we'll take care of them, everything will be just fine. It's not going to be just fine. It's something you need to kind of be honest with your patients and your family members. We're doing everything we can. It doesn't look good, but we're going to try to make them as comfortable as we can. So now on to scene safety. It's not usually dangerous in EMS, but we get ourselves trapped in situations that we do need to watch out for ourselves. Be aware of the dangers. Dangers can lurk everywhere around you, and so we need to be on our toes 24/7, looking around everywhere you go. You need to make sure you're looking after your partner, your patients, but look after yourself first. You're number one. Biggest rule in hazardous materials incidents: stay away. Do not go close. Do not run up and taste it to see if it's okay. You can't hold your breath to run in there to check things. Look for placards on the vehicles. Look for signs on the walls of a building. Use your emergency response guide that's in your ambulance, a big orange book. It tells you what to do with each incident you find based on the number that's on those signs. So look up the number. We'll go over those more in a hazmat towards the end of class, but you need to be aware that things can be bad and don't go running in. Usually carbon monoxide poisoning in a house is a person in the car trying to kill themselves, and we end up with 3 patients. The one that was in the car and the 2 cops that ran in to try to save them because they thought they could hold their breath. So always be aware of the hazards that are in your scene and do not take a chance that you don't need to. Your job as an EMS provider is to recognize problems and stand back. Your safety is number 1, your partner's number 2, and then the rest of the group is maybe somebody you worry about. Only go in if you're trained. If you haven't been trained to do hazardous materials response, don't go in. The other thing to remember is if your patient has hazardous stuff on them, you can't touch them or you become contaminated too. So make sure they're cleaned before you actually touch them. This is the best way to check for a hazardous chemical. Get the binoculars out and look. If this officer falls down, don't go running up next to him because something caused him to fall down. He was too close. Terrorist incidents. They still happen. They happen into places we don't know, and they're different reasons. But they can be as simple as a guy walking into King Soopers and start shooting, or somebody flying planes into the side of a building. They typically use burning, chemical, biological, nuclear, radiological, or explosive. Uh, we'll talk a lot more about this, but something key on terrorist incidents is they really like secondary devices. So if you go to a scene that has any hint of terrorism, be very cautious that they're sucking you in to get in the secondary device detonation zone. Rescue operations. If the patient is trapped, unless you are trained, don't go in. If you are trained to do auto extrication, you can go up and help extricate from the patient from the auto. If there's an explosive device and you see the bomb tech running away, keep up with him. If you see firefighters running from the fire, it's a real good sign. It's time for you to run too. Electrocutions, any type of electrical down wire, do not touch. Let the professionals come in and take care of that. So the big thing here is for your safety, don't do rescue unless you're trained. If you want to get trained, there's plenty of classes out there and plenty of fun times you can have taking these classes. Sometimes we take a risk to save a life. Sometimes we do something that just doesn't sound right. So we don't take risk. We don't have to. I work a lot with the linemen from the guys that work on the poles with the live electrical lines, and they always tell me we get paid to take a risk. You can turn the electric switch off and not have a risk. You don't have to take a risk. Same with ours. We can turn things off. We can wait till the police are there to settle the scene down before we go in. So take your time, make sure it's safe, and make sure you keep yourself healthy so you can take care of the patient. Sometimes people die. We're going to have to deal with that. Maybe you couldn't get to them because it was not safe to go in. So think about that. Make your good decisions. Violence, wear safe clothing. What do we mean by safe? Not loose where people can grab it. Maybe safe clothing is wearing a ballistic vest and protective gear. We do have a tactical medical team here in Colorado Springs, and they have all that gear. They're trained to go into the violent scenes. If you're part of that team, good for you. Go for it. The other thing is, if you have your equipment in your hand, you can't run, so drop it and run. Your equipment can be replaced a lot easier than you can. Carry your portable radio whenever possible. They have a button on the top called a big orange button. It's a panic button. It's called Bob, big orange button. Press it. It will give dispatch a location where you are and tell them that somebody needs help right there, and they will send everybody possible to come help you. It's also important to decide who has what roles when you go into an unsafe scene or a scene that could be unsafe. Usually the driver is your safety person and the passenger is your patient care person. So I would go in second if I'm the driver. I've got my head on a swivel. I'm looking around, trying to find out what's safe at the scene, what I need to do to make it safer, and watching over my partner as things are going. When you approach the scene, look for clues that things might not be right. It's too dark. It's too light. It's noisy. It's not noisy. Something is not right. If you're concerned, turn off the lights and siren. Wait around the corner before the cops show up first. Make sure it's safe for you to be there. Look for violence, people fighting, people yelling and screaming, crime scenes, any type of substance abuse, any type of weapon. It could be even an axe or a baseball bat. Sometimes your violence are your family members. Watch out for them. Watch out for gang members, bystanders, perpetrators. If somebody is trying to kill somebody and you're trying to save them, they may consider you to have alternate alternate objectives and try to kill you too. So be careful. Pets sometimes are very protective, so we got to watch out for them in violent scenes. This shows kind of standing at the side of the door and knocking. That way you get a little bit more protection. You can tell the EMT is the one carrying the heavy bag and the paramedic is the one with the flashlight, so he can run faster if he has to. It's kind of like the Red Bull commercial with the gazelles and the lion. You don't have to be faster than the lion, you just have to be faster than your partner. The 3 R's to danger: respond, have a plan, know what you're going to do, have a radio so you can get help if you need it, and if you ask for help, they will send help. Be nice to your dispatcher so they get the help when you need it, but they will send it. And do not re-enter. I don't get it sometimes when people run out of a scene and they say, well, it's safe, come on back. No, it's not. We're just trying to lure you in. So if you see this scene, don't go in. There's a reason they have vests and helmets and their guns. Kind of stay back and let them finish taking care of the scene before you go in. Best thing you do is flee. Drop your equipment and run. Find a place to hide and make sure you're safe. You can hide behind things that are able to camouflage you, or you can hide behind things that are safe. Big red fire trucks are great to hide behind. They take a good shot before they get damaged. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video.